Hi everyone, my name is Essen and you are listening to the Brown History Podcast. Millions of Hindus make up Pakistan's largest non-Muslim minority, almost all of whom are underprivileged and live in the province of Sindh. They are treated as second-class citizens and are systematically discriminated in every aspect of life. Hindu women in Pakistan face double discrimination, most notably through forced conversions. These conversions often involve abduction, kidnapping, rape, and forceful marriages. However, many people often see forced conversion as the end goal, but in fact, cases of forced conversions are rarely motivated by religious zeal and are instead a consequence of the commodification of and denial of agency to women in a deeply rigid patriarchal society. On this week's episode, we sit with Dr. Jürgen Schaflechner and look at the different beliefs and practices of Hindus in today's Islamic Republic of Pakistan while depict the complexities behind forced conversions and highlight the economical, social, and political realities of many Pakistani Hindu women. Dr. Jürgen Schaflechner is the author of Hinglaj Devi, Identity Change and Solidification at a Hindu Temple in Pakistan. He's also made many documentaries on the Pakistani Hindu community. They're all on his website. You can watch them all. I highly recommend them. They're fascinating, they're insightful, and they will give you a better understanding. Also, if you want to support Brown History, there are so many ways to help out. You can check out our shop, you can subscribe to our newsletter, or you can be a patron. Your contribution goes a long way. Let's get this started. It's a long episode, but it's very fascinating and very insightful, and we really try to do our best to peel the layers. All right, let's get this started. Here we go. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure. I read your book. I've watched all your documentaries on your website, and I highly recommend anybody listening to really check them out. Our topic today is we're going to be talking about Pakistani Hindus. In my life, I've never heard the term expressed like that, Pakistani Hindus. It's always been Hindus in Pakistan. It's always been kind of like a separation between the two. And when I read your book, it occurred to me that Pakistani Hindus, I've never heard that before. So I would like to know why it feels, I guess, a bit weird to say that out loud. And I wanted to know if you could kind of give us an introduction, kind of an overview of the Pakistani Hindu community. I know that they have around 4 to 10 million people who live in Pakistan that are Hindus, depending on who you ask. They're Pakistan's largest non-Muslim minority. So I want to know, in regards to caste, class, language, beliefs, location, what is the brief overview of the Pakistani Hindu community?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation and having interest in this topic. So why does it feel odd? It does feel odd. And when I started out, I remember, so I came from classical kind of studies of Sanskrit and Hindi. And I remember when I got my first text on Hinduism in Urdu, I was myself stunned, and it felt pretty odd in those days. And somehow it still does, right? But I'm very happy that there is a field now developing, which makes it less and less strange because it is a large community. And you're right, we don't know the numbers. So the Nadra numbers, the official numbers for the identity cards gives about 2.2 million people, which is a substantial number, but it's certainly on the lower end, I would estimate, right? So I estimated in the book around 6 million. And, and this basically builds on the idea that, and here we come to the next point, that the biggest bulk of Hindus or communities that self-identify as Hindus in Pakistan belong to the so-called scheduled castes, right? So that's a very difficult term in the sense because scheduled caste is a term that came up, the Pakistani state came up in 1957, which subsumed a lot of communities, such as Megwar, Koli, Bhil, right? Communities that in other frameworks we would call, Dalit communities, Choti communities, so small communities, right? Harijan communities and so on. So basically the outcast communities. Now we can talk about this a little later about the caste dynamics here, but since a large part is living in extreme poverty, right? Or has for a long time been, and this changes fortunately recently. So for a long time has been kind of disempowered. There is nothing that you could call of like a Pakistani Hindu cultural intelligentsia, so to say, which basically simply means that there is no community that provides a cultural production of Pakistani Hindus as Pakistani Hindus, right? So what do I mean by this? For a very long time, when you look at the literature that has been produced that came out of Pakistan, it's either written in languages such as Gujarati, so a large part of the Pakistani Hindu community is Gujarati speaking, Marwari speaking, right? Sindhi speaking, very obviously. So you have communities that write within the confines of their caste identity, within the confines of their mytho-historical narratives, within the confines of their practices, to the members and the kin of their Baradari, of their Jati, of their community, of their language community, so to say. Now, interestingly, only very late, you have cultural productions, meaning texts written for Pakistani Hindus, potentially also by Pakistani Hindus, for Pakistani Hindus. And how do I locate this? I locate this also by the language, because only around the 80s and the 90s, you find that books on Hinduism are written in Urdu for, so to say, a market in Pakistan. And so until then, and also, we could actually speak of let's phrase it like this. We speak of a certain kind of window where we saw a invisibilization, if you want to call it like this, of Pakistani Hinduism, because until the 1960s, and I would assume until the 65 war, the Bhagavad Gita was still played on Pakistani radio, right? So there was a sense of this part of history, which I think then ceased after the 65 and in particular later on the 71 war. So you have this window of this invisibility of Pakistani, or whatever that could be considered Pakistani Hindu identity, which then resurfaces. And how does it resurface? And that's a fascinating part of history. It resurfaces through the Angres, again, through the Goras. Why? Because the ISKCON community, the Krishna consciousness community, was one of the few communities that was able to proselytize, meaning to spread knowledge, education about Hinduism in Pakistan. Why? Simply because most of the members are part of, being, the ISKCON society from, established by Prabhupada in the 60s, and then had a huge response in the counterculture in the United States. So large part of the devotees, of the people who became acharyas in ISKCON were from the so-called West, were white, right? And since there was no exchange between Pakistan and India necessarily, people could not travel freely and easily, what you find is that with the beginning of the 1980s, it is the ISKCON society that basically starts to bring, cultural impact, texts, ritual, of course, their own particular understanding of what they see as Hinduism being played, Vaishnava Hinduism, of course. But this is one of the few things where you see that the Pakistani Hindu community feels itself connected to a rather global movement somehow, right?
Right.
And then just the last sentence maybe here. And so very interestingly, what we had after this window of invisibilization, so to say, very curiously, then it comes in the 80s, you have a kind of revitalization movement that of course starts in the urban centers and then spreads. But then, and this is kind of, or is at least now my main interest with this book, it is social media that opens up suddenly the lost kind of Pakistani Hindu community to become a part of a global community again.
So today, how would you describe the Hindu population in terms of like strength and unification and connected to the rest of the world?
Coming back to this question of why does a Pakistani Hindu identity, why does this feel odd somehow? Why does it sound odd to us, right? So discursively, I think there are two positions which are very important to think about this. Where does this idea of a Pakistani Hindu emerge, so to say? And then I think one of the positions that is very prominent and that I have written extensively about is this position of the Pakistani religious nationalism on the one hand, which has a vested interest in describing Hindus in a certain kind of way, meaning Hindus need to be the enemy of the state. They need to be the enemy of Islam. They need to be the enemy of Pakistan to perpetuate the Dogom Nazaria, right? The two-nation theory. And here you have a variety of very, very interesting landscapes, which all kind of point into the same direction, right? What does this mean? School books and education would be one part of this. There are excellent studies about how, quote to quote, the Hindu is portrayed in education, in social science books, but also in examples in books that teach children how to read, or mathematical books and so on, right? Another part which I find is really interesting is, and unfortunately a genre that is dying, is the pulp fiction genre, right? We have such a wonderful, creative and vast and entertaining pulp fiction literature genre, so to say, in Pakistan, that when you look at closely has certain kinds of genres attached to certain kinds of religious minorities, right?
Stereotypes.
Right, certain stereotypes, you're right, certain tropes, you could say. So for example, if Jews appear in these pulp fiction stories, they're usually a part of the Mossad, they're usually in cahoots with the elders of Zion, right? They have certain kinds of roles that they play. Now, when Hindus appear in these stories, they usually appear as the tantric. They usually appear as some kind of black magician who tries to steal the innocent Muslim girl, try to take over the world, and so on and so forth. And then they need to be stopped towards the end by some pious Muslim student who then saves the world, right?
Right.
So these kinds of different landscapes all point or are, let's say, all informed by this religious Pakistani nationalism, which has a vested interest in portraying Hindus in a certain kind of way, right? And these roles then change. Now, the other side of how this signifier, how this Pakistani identity is kind of filled with meaning, are I would say that the inner Hindu conflicts between the scheduled castes on the one hand and the upper castes on the other hand, right? So we talked about this before. Biggest part of the Pakistani Hindu community, some people say 80, some people even say up till 95% belong to these empowered scheduled castes, right? Now, these communities have seen a lot of development in the last, let's say, decade or 15 years. Unsurprisingly, with the coming of social media and also with mobility, right? And so the question of who counts as a Pakistani Hindu, who is a Pakistani Hindu, I think somehow needs to be answered at the threshold of, on the one hand, the representation of Pakistani nationalism, and on the other hand, all of these discussions about representation and self-representation between lower and upper castes in Pakistan.
So it's very complicated.
It is like everything.
Yeah, like everything. So then you have this Hindu community, and a large percentage of it is lower caste, is vulnerable, is weak. But you have this other percentage that's upper caste that has success, that has found a place in Pakistan, maybe as business owners, maybe as landowners, maybe as politicians. I'm sure the experiences, of course, are very different for both sides. So before we get into the majority, for the 10% who've made it in Pakistan, what is their experience like in Pakistan? Like, are they also kind of targeted, or do they fit well? Does money speak a lot in this situation? And I would also want to ask is, as a community as a whole, what role does Pakistani Hindus have when it comes to politics of the country? Is there a voice? Are they heard, or is it largely forgotten or lost or ignored?
Right. So I start with your last question about the political representation. So
political representation, that's a better way of saying it.
Studies in Pakistani Hinduism are always studies also in Sindhology, if you want to say it. So because in the same way as you had like 90% of the Pakistani Hindus being from the Choti communities, the smaller communities, so to say, in the same way, more than 95% probably, almost that the biggest bulk of the Pakistani Hindus live in the province of Sindh, right? And the province of Sindh has traditionally a certain form of political representation in the PPP, right?
Mm-hmm.
So who are these people? Generally, we could say those people who are in Pakistan, or people who stayed in Pakistan, Hindus who stayed in what is now Pakistan, so West Pakistan, either had nothing to lose or a lot to lose. So it's both parts, so to say, of the spectrum. The middle class has widely disappeared, right? So what does this mean? So you have a landowning elite.
Yeah.
Vadero community in Sindh, as they are called, or you would have the Khana Badosh, the people, Khana Badosh, so who have their house on their shoulders, who are basically vagrants who move through the country, so to say. And then very often they are from the scheduled castes, right?
Right.
Now, very interestingly, and this is why I love your question, in terms of political representation, something really curious happened in the year 2002. So what happened in the year 2002? First of all, a few months after 9/11, right? So Pakistan not involved, but somehow in the eyes of the United States, very much involved, needed to be a strategical friend for the United States. And so in the aftermath of this and the pressure of the United States, and later also with the Kerry-Lugar bill, a lot of things changed for the non-Muslims in Pakistan. One of these things was the abolishment of the separate electorates, which means Hindus could only vote for Hindus, Parsis for Parsis, Christians for Christians, and so on.
Yeah.
Right. So this happens in 2002. Now, we're speaking about Karachi now, right? So I don't know how deep I should go into this, but probably the name Aldaf Hussain and the MQM rings a bell for many of the listeners. One of the first person who has figured out when the joint electorate system came back that there is a large voting pool of the so-called sweeper communities, so the untouchables, or the communities that I would like to call the Choti communities, was Aldaf Hussain. So in Narayanpur, in the center of Karachi, where most of the, or a large part of the so-called sweeper communities then live, who also works for the Karachi municipality, he had a large political function where he officially announced to all of his party members that these people are now, these people meaning, the lower castes or the untouchables, are now to be treated equally. And so with him, and even now, and this is a story that I'm happy to share with you, which I just heard myself a few weeks ago during my work in Narayanpur. So if you talk to people in Narayanpur and you ask them, what has changed? Is it the iPhone that has changed? Is it, the smartphone that has changed? Is it WhatsApp? Is it your access to Facebook? They say Aldaf Hussain and
Wow.
the MQM. So they're staunch MQM supporters because the MQM was one of the first that started this, and then from there it spread into other cities. Hyderabad also an MQM stronghold in this regard, right? Okay, so much to the political representation. As you see, old Sindhi Hindu elite, very much on the side of the PPP, right? Scheduled castes, most of them Gujarati speaking, or from the area which is Gujarat, in urban areas, very much on the MQM side, right?
Yeah.
Now, what is the situation? There is always, when we speak about the religious minorities in Pakistan, there's always the next thought that comes: how about religious persecution, right?
Yeah.
That
was my next question.
Did I answer your question before?
Yeah.
Okay.
Things are getting better, and there's the big divide between the upper and the lower class. There's basically no relationship there, and
Right.
The 10% are starting to get a voice, but that doesn't mean that they represent the 90%.
Right. The curious thing is, that caste is, and I have been trying to figure this out for many, many years, and it took me some time, because when you ask a variety of people in Pakistan, both Muslim majority, but also from the Hindu minority, people would say there's no such thing as caste, right?
Right.
And people said this repeatedly: caste doesn't happen in Pakistan, it's a thing that we have in India, and so on and so forth. And it took me quite some time to actually figure out how both sides want to make caste obsolete, both sides being the community who themselves suffer from, Chuchat, Zadbat, caste oppression, but also the upper castes, right? Why do they want to do this? So the scheduled caste communities who would suffer from this caste discrimination would very often, and this is something that Radha Bhil, who is a Dalit activist, called the invisible revolution, would very often try to cover over their background, right? So you would have a lot of communities. If you ask them, "Bhai, aap kahan se aaye hai, or aap kis community se belong karte hain?" They would say, "Hum Gujarat, we are Gujaratis, right? We are Marwaris, we are all of these local kind of geographical identities, or we are, Gujarati speaking, or in very, very few cases, Urdu speaking, and so on." And the upper castes, very often the Sindhi Hindus, under the guise of Sindhi nationalism, and Sindhi nationalism very often being infused by this idea of harmony, by this idea of, the Sufi spirit that crosses through Islam and through Hinduism, is older than Islam, is even older than Hinduism. So Sindhi culture is so to say being higher than both of these religious denominations. Lies quite oddly with this idea that Sindh, as this harmonious province, has so many caste discriminations, right? So it was for a long time very difficult for me to figure out why both sides try to cover over the idea of caste to a certain extent, right?
Yeah, even though it exists, very much so. So
Very
they're
much.
basically
Very much.
lying to you and trying to cover up.
I wouldn't call it lying on the in this.
Not
Sounds a little bit, but there is like a strategy of an attempt of social upward mobility on the lower side, an attempt to portray the community more harmonious than it is on the upper side, I think.
So the upper side just don't want to, I guess they don't want to tell you about it because it doesn't look good for them, and then the lower side doesn't want to be seen as a lower caste, so they say that it doesn't exist, and in the end, overall, that I guess strengthens caste in general in the region.
Right.
Okay.
And then, of course, as a little footnote, I mean, people might not know this because if they're only listening, but as a white anthropologist, I also get a certain kind of story, obviously, right? That people portray about themselves, and that they want to also have, so to say, out there in the West, amongst the Goras and so on, right? So of course, I'm also a canvas of projection, as I think every anthropologist is to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's also, the standpoint epistemology, if one could say, so the subject position, which I think, of course, is important. I mean, maybe that's a good segue to your question about questions about forced conversion, questions about persecution, where you suddenly are, and I mean, you're always very knee deep in ideology and in politics when you work on religion, basically when you're an anthropologist and you want to learn about other communities and how things work and so on. But in this regard, something that I have experienced with all non-Muslim communities in my work now is on Jewish communities in Pakistan, on Christian communities in Pakistan. I'm also working with Ahmadis. So what kind of goes through these communities is that there is a certain kind of appeal to the outside world, which very, very interestingly perpetuates very old sedimented tropes of persecution because they travel fast and far. So what does this mean? It means, and I can easily show this with the notion of forced conversion, which, as you also said in the beginning, is one of the first things that you encounter when you ask about persecution, when you ask about the grievances and the difficulties that not only Hindu communities but also Christian communities need to face.
Yeah.
Now, the issue of forced conversion is very difficult, simply because forced conversions are there. There is no doubt about this. Forced conversions happen, but very often they don't happen because of religious zeal. And that's a very difficult distinction to make, right?
So just to pause you, if most people have I think surface level understanding of what forced conversion in Pakistan is, I think the most of them would say, imagine forced conversion to be converting a non-Muslim woman, in this case a Hindu woman, as a means to spread Islam. I think is the average thinking. All right. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that, and there's a lot of nuances. Also, yeah, so I really want to explore this and try to break this down layer by layer because there's so many layers to it. And you have this amazing documentary on your website called Thrust into Heaven, which I highly recommend everybody to watch it because in the documentary, you are hanging out with this Hindu organization, nonprofit charity, um, where where they investigate cases of forced conversion, and you go around speaking to all sorts of people from people who've been abducted to people who claim a family member has been abducted to the people who've been accused of converting people to people who willingly converted to Islam. So we see all sides to this, and it's really, really fascinating. So let's carry on.
Thank you so much for the flavor. I'm really happy that you like the film. So then let's take it very slowly here, right? So forced conversions is not an issue since yesterday. Forced conversions, since the separation of Bengal and probably much more before this, forced conversions are basically a main issue in communitarian politics, simply because they make politics, male politics, on the body of women, right? So forced conversions, the idea of forced conversion is nothing new in the history of South Asia. Now, forced conversions, I think, really came into the limelight in Pakistan in the year 2012 with the case of Rinkle Kumari. Now, Rinkle Kumari came from a community which you could say from an upper middle class community, was well connected in the northern part of Sindh, where there is actually a very, very strong Hindu community, a business community, which deals in a large variety of goods and also has a political voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Rinkle Kumari disappeared one day.
What year?
This in 2012, February 2012. And she disappeared one day and then a few days later reappeared in Barjundi Sharif, which is a dargah, so the religious site, where the main kind of head of the Barjundi Sharif is Mian Mitu. Muslim scholar and the local landlord, so to say, also
influential and powerful Islamic Maulana type figure.
Right. So he converted Rinkle Kumari, gave her the name Farial Shah, and then also married her off. Now, this brought this issue onto the stage, so to say. What happened before, within the sovereign confines of landlords, where the journalists and the police and basically everybody does what the landlord says, at least in this local environment. Here in this moment, we had a national kind of emergency where even people from the United States, congressmen from the United States, kind of had the feeling that they needed also to contribute and intervene in this regard. Now, the issue here is complex simply because both sides tried to. When I say both sides, you have the civil society on the one hand and the Hindu minority. Together, let's say on the left, and then on the right, the more conservative Muslim and Islamic parties on the other side. Both of them tried to establish their own narrative of what happened, right? So the Hindu minority in the civil society needed to portray this disappearance as a form of religious zeal, to say, well, see, this always happens. This is an old tradition. Islam wants to spread itself, and it does this by kidnapping our innocent, girls, our betis, so our daughters,
yes,
who are forcefully converted to Islam. The other side, the Muslim side, needed to portray this as a form of religious zeal. So everybody sees how great Islam is. So Farial Shah, Rinkle Kumari also saw this, and so she wanted to convert. Now, what is happening is in the middle ground is not necessarily visible and could not be perpetuated in the public sphere. Why? Because it's
the girl is the middle, and
right. The girl is the middle.
Yeah, she's the middle, and she doesn't have a stage on this.
Right. And the point is, her agency was a question of honor, of ghairat. So the more we looked into this, the more I looked into this, the more it became clear that Rinkle actually had a relationship with this person. Rinkel was a teenager. She probably just, fell in love. She wanted to just live out whatever teenagers do in this regard, right?
Yeah.
But this kind of female agency, this kind of possibility of an elopement, this possibility of maybe, being, a teenager was completely covered over. And so what I find interesting in the question of forced conversions, which very often is associated with the questions of persecution of religious minorities in Pakistan, is that the story of forced conversion completely leaves out the possibility of an elopement when we come to cases of women above 16 or respectively 18 years old. Why 16 or 18? Because in the Sindh, in the province of Sindh, the legal age of marriage is 18 years old. In Punjab, it's 16 years old, right?
Yeah.
So to emphasize again, forced abductions are there and happen I don't want to say on a day-to-day basis. I don't have any kind of measurement, but they happen regularly in Pakistan. These are huge problems because women who disappear, women who elope are a huge stigma for the family where the woman has been taken from, so to say, right?
Right. So
now,
if you're a Hindu family and your daughter runs away for whatever reason to marry a guy to just have a better life, whatever it is, and she uses Islam as a mean, or maybe she wants to convert, maybe she really does care about Islam and wants to be Muslim, but either way, she marries a guy and for him she converts to Islam. It's in that community, in that Hindu community, it's seen as like a shameful thing, and the family will probably want to save face, protect their dignity in the community, and then they'll lie and say that this woman, our daughter, has been kidnapped, right? And that's one big thing that happens a lot, but at the same time, it takes away agency from the actual cases of where somebody is kidnapped and forcefully converted. And that causes a lot of problems, and it's hard to know. Right. So yeah. So yeah, all right. That's just want people to know that. So carry on.
So let me just and so you see, that this issue is so complex. It took us so long to kind of unravel what is going on here. This is an issue that is way too complex for the way in which we communicate these days, right? Yeah. In what we could call communicative capitalism, which means, the faster, the wittier you are, the more the more moral outrage you're able to trigger. In these kinds of media atmospheres, stories that are very complex are not traveling very fast and very far, right? Yeah. So stories about forced conversion travel very fast and far. Why? Because they are building on sedimented old tropes, on old stereotypes that have been there for a very long time and can easily be shared. They can easily be separated in a black and white. Now, what I want to emphasize here is there is a lot of violence that we need to deal with, we need to encounter, we need to think about how to solve this in Pakistan when it comes to women, right? There's a lot of violence that happens, but many of these forms of violence are not represented in what is widely, so to say, considered as a form of forced conversion. Simply because the notion of ghairat, the notion of honor, is a notion that goes through all religious communities, right? Yeah. Be the Muslim majority, the Christian minority, the Hindu minority, right? Now, at one point, people and activists have realized this. They know this. They know this. They know that there are certain stories that travel fast and far, so to say. They know that there are certain issues that people can repeat to get a certain possibility, to get somebody to listen to them, so to say. And then maybe in the second step, the possibility to speak about other issues that are haunting them. And this is what I find so interesting, and where the agency of many of the persecuted communities then comes back into play, so that people say intentionally, "Bhai, ye to hamara hatiyar hai. This is our weapon." What does this mean? So this is the quote of an activist with whom I worked. He was like, "Listen, nobody has listened to us for many years. Nobody even knew that there are Hindus in Pakistan. So now this is an issue where we're going to be able to have people listen to us. And we know that many of the cases are cases which are not on the basis of religious zeal, which are not, because of love jihad or whatever people call this, but they know they are getting a lot of publicity, a lot of attention, not only in Pakistan, but also obviously in BJP India, but also in the West, right? Yeah. So it has become a certain kind of tactic of a very precarious community that has been overlooked for many, many, many years to utilize things that are easily understandable for a public, break them down somehow so that they are easily digestible. And then maybe in the negotiation, in what comes out of this, being able to explain the more intersectional grievances that they have. Grievances that deal with education, grievances that deal with the lack of water, the extreme poverty, bonded labor, and all of these things that have nothing to do, so to say, with a form of religious persecution. So I think it makes sense in this regard to separate a very real form of discrimination, which is always intersectional. The discrimination which is based on gender norms, discrimination which is also based on just, forms of racism, forms of lack of education, lack of financial capital, and so on and so forth. Intersectional discrimination on the one hand, very, very hard to sell, very, very hard to kind of make into a brand and to sell, to get fundings from, either inside Pakistan or outside Pakistan. And then on the other hand, a discourse of persecution, very easily to sell. Savages are always the bad people. There is a very clear black and white, and easily to sell, right? So you have on hand intersectional discrimination, which is very real on the ground, and then the persecution which travels fast and far, right, and can be easily sold, and then also leads to financial capital, which the community is very much in need. There's no doubt about this.
It's very twisted, I guess, because the person who does need help is not getting the help while everybody else is using that trauma to gain something from it. If you convert to, I just wanted to know, if you convert to Islam in Pakistan and you decide to leave Islam or convert back, is it against the law? Is something bad happen to you? Or is it socially unacceptable that it can follow you around?
That's a curious question, because I'm right now dealing with converts, so ex-Muslims in Pakistan, people who have turned their back to the majority, but people who have been born into Islam. Now, with converts, so people who have been, who were Hindus before or Christians before, and then who converted to Islam, it's not against the law, but there is an issue with the blasphemy laws that you basically, by rejecting the Prophet, you would commit apostasy. Under 297, thus you would actually be then punishable, by the blasphemy laws for this particular crime of rejecting the Prophet by converting back to your religion. This never happens. It doesn't have to happen because the societal pressure is so strong that marriages between the religions are almost impossible. And I document a few of those in my book right now. Interfaith marriages are almost but impossible. So either one of the two partners needs to convert. And the interesting thing is there are also people in Pakistan who convert from Islam to a different religion, to, for example, marry a Christian partner, so to say. But they need to live, and it's a blatant self-advertisement at this moment. But that's a film that is going to come out in a few months. It's called My Two Lives. They literally live two lives because all of their documentation is still Muslim. They go to church in this case, right? They live a completely Christian life. They have a Christian family. They have children whom they educate, in whatever Pentecostal, whatever belief they are in. But outside, they need to act still as if they would be a part of the Muslim fold, so to say. Mm-hmm. Very often, these people have no other chance, these couples, than to either live in shelters, which are then helping them, or to leave the Islamic Republic because of societal pressure, not because of legal pressure.
when I was watching a documentary and you were interviewing all these people, it seemed like the fundamental issue of forced conversion was a society plagued with patriarchy because in Canada, if a woman wants to leave her family, you just ask her, right? But in Pakistan, in a society with such patriarchy, you can't ask them, and even if they said something, no one would listen or believe them. And yeah, there was this one family you were interviewing who said that their daughter was kidnapped at age 21, 22, and she left. And then you're asking more questions, and then you're like asking her, first they say that she got abducted, but then you ask like, did she take anything with her? And they're like, she took jewelry, she took her all her dresses, and you're like, wait a minute, if she's abducted, how did she take all her clothes and everything? And then you ask her if she was allowed, if she came back, would you forgive her? And they said yes. And then you asked her if she came back, would she be allowed to marry a Muslim man? And they said no, we don't do that. And then you ask her, can she marry a man of her choice? And they said no, we don't do that. Elders choose. And then they say that she's engaged. And you asked her when was she engaged, and she said she was engaged at age 10 around. And then you just kind of see right there is one, why would she, it's a good reason to leave. And number two, you can see that he has no, I'm not saying that she has any more of a voice if she converts to Islam and marries into a Muslim family, but clearly she doesn't have a voice back home. And you were interviewing these women who just converted and they were like so young, and you're asking them questions, and sometimes they're smiling, but sometimes they have no clue what they're saying, and they're surrounded by men, old men, and it's so hard to tell if their answers are coerced or are they really being sincere. Did they really leave home of their choice? It's very hard to know. So overall, I'd say like it's such a tough thing to crack because of the patriarchy and the class and poverty. I'm just saying that.
Right. No, no, I'm really happy that this is what you got from the film, because the film was uh, so often in this conundrum of, because let's start like this. I love film because with film you can say so many things without saying them, right? And the issue of forced conversion is in itself is so deep in muddy waters, because even if you talk to the women, and this is the situation you're speaking about, even if you have somebody right in front of your lens, and even if you can ask them, you never have the feeling you actually talk to someone, right? And this took a lot of time, to find people who would be women who would be very openly telling their stories. And then very often these stories are stories of female agency, a form of resistance against the patriarchy, right?
Mhm.
But also some of these stories, like blatant form of sexual crimes and abuse, and
Yes.
also child marriages, right? If you
Yeah.
remember, if we switch over to a different religious minority now, the case of Arzu Raja, that was very, very large in the media, and this was just a typical case of child marriage and child grooming, right? So here the parameters must be very different, because once you engage with women who are minor, everything that they do without the consent of their parents is, per the law of Pakistan, under duress and thus kidnapping. So legally, you're in a very different kind of métier. So when I speak about these female agencies and these forms also of resistance against patriarchy, I always emphasize that these are then women who are 18 or above very often. But these cases, and that's then from a media anthropological perspective, maybe these cases are very often advertised in the same breath, so to say, as all the other cases are advertised. They never get a footnote of the potential patriarchal oppression within the Hindu minority community themselves, because because you're a minority community does not mean that you don't have
Mhm.
own issues of oppression or and of inequality within your community.
When a woman does get forcefully converted, and when I say forcefully converted, that people should also keep in mind that that also means, kidnapping, abduction, and being held against her will in a secluded place. So when a woman is converted and she is somehow free or gets rescued, is there justice that she does she get usually, or is this something in the Pakistani law or in the courtroom system that gets covered up, or the person that kidnaps her gets punished?
Right. So that's very hard to answer because, as so many things in Pakistan, it changes depending on the situation, depending on the court, depending on the judge, right? And then also the question is, what is justice in this regard? Which kind of case is it? I think that the cases of the Christian girls, or the case of Arzu Raja, for example, and other Christian girls that I worked with, I think in this case, yes, I think they have been, justice is a difficult word, but at least they have been back into their families. They are able to study. They are able to work on this trauma that has happened to them. So they are, maybe if we can define justice in this regard, they are living a normal life under these kinds of circumstances. So I would hope that I'm right to say, at least in some instances, I think that there is a certain form of justice possible. In many other instances, however, I need to insist that the damage that has been done has been so significant that any form of justice seems to be futile, or so the concept of justice even doesn't really make much sense in this regard. So, for example, if you elope, as one of the cases that I've worked on, a woman who eloped, a love marriage, a Hindu woman who wanted to marry a Muslim man, they eloped, they also got married, she lived with him, they tried to have a child, very long-term relationship. But then she left this family. Why did she leave the family? Because the Muslim family, particularly the women in the family, saw her as a chut, as dirty, as a part of the untouchable communities, as we could say, somebody who is not. So she was, in short, she was not allowed to cook. She was not allowed to wash the clothes. So she was
impure.
Right, impure. Thank you.
Impure.
She was within the family, even though she has been living in this family for quite some months at this point. Has converted to Islam. Was very, very happy with her husband. The husband was very happy with her. She left because, as she said, the women in the family did not allow her to do. They treated her badly. Didn't allow her to do anything, and this was on the basis of her alleged impurity in their eyes. Right.
What happened to her? She never went back.
She got married to a Hindu man in a village very, very far from where she lived. So she was married off, so to say, right? She was married off in this regard. So the concept of justice does not seem to make a lot of sense very often when we speak about these cases of alleged forced conversion.
Is there any charity organizations you can name that if somebody wants to help out in this situation, forced conversions or any kind of oppression amongst the Hindu communities, is there a charity that they can donate to or help out?
Yeah, there are, but as many good charities, they kind of work under the radar, and so
you don't want to. Oh, okay, I see. That sucks. Oh my God. Okay.
But it's a part of this, right? Because I think those who do really like the work, who are actually
honest work.
No, I don't want to like blatantly say, because there are a lot of people who do honest work and also sell it very well. But the thing is, we can also talk about this. The thing is, the people who actually really do the work need to do the work under the radar. Why? Because women who have been, allegedly forcefully converted have been converted on apni marzi se, according to their own will, whatever the situation is, who have converted, need to figure out how to get their papers redone, right? And so the problem is, how do you get somebody who has officially been in the media as a converted Muslim woman? How do you reconnect this woman back to her community, be it Hindu, be it Christian, right?
Sorry, I don't understand. they are forcefully a woman is forcefully converted, and her papers are changed also
Right.
by the
So
people who converted her.
right.
Eh,
So okay, let me.
what are the papers like a citizenship papers?
So the forced conversion works like this. Legally, it works like this. Why is there always the nexus of forced conversion and marriage? It's simply like this because as a nikahwan, somebody who does a nikah in Pakistan, as long as you have the proper papers, nobody can actually sue you for doing a marriage between people who might be, minor, who might, obviously be still children, as long as the papers are there. Now, how do you get these papers? You get these papers through a conversion by, getting a corrupt religious authority involved, who then would sign up on a conversion document on which you would find the age, right, and the name and everything of the people involved. And with this age and name, then you would be able then to go to a nikahwan and then get a marriage certificate from there. So this is why forced conversions and marriages are so often closely linked and connected to cases of child grooming, right? So these papers are made, and once these papers are made, the problem is, if you now have a woman, as it happened with a few of them that I worked with, who, due to whatever reason, come back, either they are freed, either they did it, they escaped, whatever it is, these papers are out there. Their faces are out there. They are kind of visible out there. So to work with them, to reintegrate them into their community, particularly if they're a minor, to get them into a school, you kind of need to work under the radar, right? Because as one of the activists said, "Jugaad karna hai." We need to do a makeshift. We need to get these papers through jugaad, meaning through little rishwat here, a little money there, a little bribe here, a little bribe there. And so the actual work of reintegrating these women is usually then, or it's not usually, is in the case that I know and I work with, done with through an organization that is not advertising.
But why does the papers prevent them from integrating back, right? What's stopping? Why would a nikah or a marriage certificate stop her from going back home or going to a school or starting another life?
Because if you are documented as a Muslim at Nadra, every kind of documentation is going to be having a Muslim kind of religious identity. Passports in Pakistan always have the religion identity mentioned, right?
Yeah.
So now assume you would want to marry, now you're 18, you want to marry a Christian or a Hindu boy.
Yeah.
You still have issues because you're actually officially a Muslim woman, for example. Or you want to go to a Christian school, you want to do your A levels or your tastes, and all of the documentation that you have falls under this category of you being a Muslim, because this was officially, these documents were made when you were forcefully married off, right?
Right. Okay. And I guess there's no rule, there's no law where if a girl is younger than 18, she can't get married. Like there's no.
That's the point. There is a law.
There is a law. So then how does marriage? Okay, so if there's a religious cleric and he wants to marry a woman to guy and he sees that she's like 11, can't the man marrying the two go to jail for that?
That's exactly the point. The nikahwan note, because the person who actually officiates the marriage does it on the basis of certain papers. So now, why is it are non-Muslim girls? How can I say this? Why is it easier for pedophiles to forcefully marry minor non-Muslim girls? Because once they are converted with a little money, with the corrupt religious authority, their actual age of 11 or 12 could be made into the age of 16, which is the legal age in the Punjab. or 18 in the legal age in the Sindh. Now,
right.
you sign this off, right? You give the papers to the Nikahwan. The Nikahwan is like, well, you were obviously 18. You're obviously 18 because this is written here and documented in this paper. So they have no incentive to actually, do anything about this because nothing could happen to them because they decide on the basis of these papers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And on the legality of these papers.
Okay, I see.
It's very complicated. It's a very complicated issue.
Yeah. Okay. I guess okay, but let's say a Hindu woman gets abducted, kidnapped, converted, forced like in a prison in this guy's house. She's still a Muslim woman in prison. Couldn't she file a police claim that I'm being held hostage despite the religion, just as a person, as a Muslim woman now, still being held in prison?
Yes, of course. But how do you? The thing is, how do you file this claim? For, let's say we put this a situation that you described into the rural areas of Pakistan, into a village in Sindh. Where would you file the FIR? The police. Every institution in Pakistan is crisscrossed by baradaris, by patron-client relationships. So you would not be able to file this within the house, within the village of the family that you're a part of, because everybody would immediately know. So what would you have to do? You would have to go to another place. And then suddenly issues come of traveling. Do you have the money to travel? Do you have the money to buy a bus ticket? Can you travel alone? Do you have the education even to know that you have these rights in the first place? That would also be an issue. But and this is why, in many of these cases of abducted women, both Muslim women abducted by Muslim men and also non-Muslim women abducted by non-Muslim men, basically through the religious denominations. One of the ways to get these women back is to organize a force of thugs, basically, figure out where the place is, and just with force get the woman back.
Right.
That's because the legal possibilities that you have are so limited, particularly if you're not financially strong, to get a woman back once she is in the household of another man, because very often then women are considered to be, a certain part of the man's private sphere. So one of the women that I talked to, I don't want to say that one of the girls that got abducted, I don't want to say her name, but her mother had been going through hell for the last 4 years, 3.5, 4 years. She had been with every organization. She had been with every lawyer. She had been, with every possible, legal action she could do. And in one of the talks that she had, I asked her, what is there? How can you get your daughter back? So she is in Karachi. Her daughter has been kidnapped to Multan, so a city quite far from Karachi.
So she knows where she is.
She knows where she is. They even talk on the phone, from time to time. But,
wow.
But the point is, if you're in Multan, if the Baradari of, let's say you're you're a Chatoi, you're a Mandro, you're a member of a certain kind of Baradari, you have a patron-client relationship with the influentials in your environment.
Yeah.
How would you, as an outsider, be able to penetrate into this patron-client relationship? Because I would basically go to the landlord, to the highest influential who is a part of my Baradari, would tell them the situation, would say, I married this girl, I want to have protection, and you would get this protection. So the only way because what does this protection mean? This means you cannot just call the police station there in Multan and be like, listen, my daughter is there, because the police is basically, in the pockets of the local landlord, right? So how do you do it? And this is what this woman, who should remain anonymous, said to me. The only thing that we can get gets the equivalent of 5,000 or 6,000 euros together, get a bunch of gundas.
6,000 euros.
Yes. So I translated it in my, I don't know what the.
Okay. That's still a lot. Right. Okay.
A lot of money.
Yeah, so a lot of money.
This is an amount of money that she, from her socioeconomic background, would never have, right? So that's important. But she said, we take our thugs, हमारे गुंडे, इसको लेके हम जाते हैं, and then we come back, and then interestingly, so then we hide in Karachi and immediately marry her off to another boy, into another family. Because once she is then separated, see, the point is, the really interesting part of this is that there is no in-between position for a woman possible within Pakistan's patriarchal society. You need to be either a daughter or a wife. Right?
Yeah.
You need to be the wife of this person, or you need to be the wife of that person. So
Right.
the easiest thing in this regard is to get her back from her kidnapper and then marry her immediately off to somebody else, so that she has this connection and she has the protection of the family, right?
She's taken, quote unquote.
Yes. Yeah.
Is she still, is the mom still looking for her, or is she been rescued?
So she had, so when I talked to her now in the beginning of this year, she had completely given up. She was, I write about this in my book that's going to come out in the next year. She didn't even want to talk to me. I was, because I only could convince her to talk to me, because I said I'm actually researching the mediators who mediate between ground level cases and larger donations, larger donors and organizations, right? So one of the things that I'm researching is, are these mediator figures, within Muslim, non-Muslim communities, who have the ability to speak, have the ability to speak English, who have a certain kind of social media exposure, visibility, and so on, who, when these cases happen, latch on to these cases and try to help, but also, to a certain extent, also try to increase their visibility and their profile. And I knew that her case was kind of spoiled, so to say, because there were a lot of mediators, a lot of organizations that all were very interested in this case, and they basically spoiled it. There were too many people who tried to help. There were too many people who tried to claim the authority, to have the sole authority to speak about this case to the media, to speak about this case to the donors, and they basically messed it completely up.
Oh my God.
And this is also the reason why her daughter is still with this person, because the actual lawyers who had a long, it's crazy, the actual lawyers who had a long profile, a long experience with these cases. And I can tell you, it's a Christian girl. The actual lawyer was taken away from the case because the church came in and said, the lawyer is a Muslim and he can never represent you properly. And then they also said, and he's also probably a Qadiani, so he's also probably an Ahmadi. So also, as you know, in Pakistan, calling someone an Ahmadi is an affront. It's a gali that you give. And so they basically told the family that the lawyer who is actually really good in this, who has a strong history in working in these cases, will not represent her properly because he's a Muslim. So you need to have a Christian lawyer. The problem is the Christian lawyer had no idea what they were doing, and they completely messed up the case, leading to the fact that this poor girl is still with her kidnapper in Multan.
That is very depressing. That is very depressing.
It is very depressing. And they mainly did it because there is a lot of money in these cases. There's a lot of money in these cases. And I documented cases where large organizations, large church organizations have repeatedly solicited donations, have repeatedly sent out emails and letters to help, and have explicitly said what they're going to do with this money. And I, living in Karachi, saw that this money has never reached this family, nor this girl. So it's a very depressing, it is. But then on the other hand, it is not, I think, the moral failure of the people who are involved. I think it is the corrupt system where, any form of humanitarian effort always needs to be under the force of neoliberal capitalism, because only with money you can help. And you can only, and we come a little bit back to what we said in the beginning, you can only get attention in this attention economy where we're so, like things that happen, Ukraine happens, Israel happens, Gaza happens, all of these things. You can only get attention by having a very close, very direct black and white story, that it travels far and travels fast. And then people can pay attention to this. And this is why these cases are going to be repeated in this way. And this is why these cases are represented in this way, because people listen, then people give money for stereotypes and tropes and easily understandable cases that they recognize easily. So it is, let me emphasize this again, it is not the moral corruption of the individuals that I worked with, it is the moral corruption of a capitalist human rights system, where where the market defines completely, what where this money comes from and what you can do with this money.
By the way, it's kind of surprising to know that the church is against amities. It's like minorities versus minorities. It's like just so random. It's just insane.
I mean, that would not be an official kind of church statement, but this is what the representatives did to give to give a bad name to the person who actually was taking over the case, right?
Yeah, but I guess they wanted to get rid of the guy, so they used whatever ammo they had on him, they used it against him.
That's exactly the point. And that's and this is where these cases, like where you have a direct connection between capitalist human rights markets and the solidification of communitarian boundaries. But where the community, the organization says you need to have a Christian lawyer, right? Because Muslims can never represent us properly. And this is the sad part of it, that organizations like the one that I'm not naming, but it's going to be in my book, are then also contributing to these stereotypes, because they then are quoted by, for example, in the report on international religious freedom by the State Department of the United States. So these kinds of stories, which are built on how easily we can sell the grievances of the people that we actually want to help, the simplification of these stories then makes it into the public sphere, on this, allegedly very objective and neutral organizations, such as, like an interest in the religious freedom by the State Department, however objective this is, of course, right? But this is how these stories get the stereotypes get perpetuated and repeated and travel, right?
Yeah. I want to also talk about the men of the Pakistani Hindu community, and I want to talk about not men, children, families. I want to talk about what is the discrimination and the marginalization look like for the community in general when it comes to education, jobs, human rights, equal rights, things like that. Because my next question after that is going to be about the Pakistani Hindus who leave Pakistan and try for a better life in India, and then what happens over there. So before I get there, I want to talk about what's the situation here for them, for the 90% who are from the poorer side.
Mm-hmm. So as usual, money solves a lot of issues. So if you're from a wealthy family, then I think the discrimination that you're facing, at least from what people have told me in the settings that where I met them over the last 15 years, it's very often that they complain, they lament about a certain kind of feeling alienated, right? Small things such as cricket, Pakistan is India, and
it's a big thing.
They all go, and everybody's for Pakistan, and there's a Hindu amongst a circle of friends, and people are like, are you for India, are you for Pakistan, right? This kind of probably extremely annoying, but comparatively like more or less benign forms of discrimination on the basis of just feeling as I called it at one point, betwixt and between, and an alien, right? In not really a citizens of this kind of state. And then of course the spectrum goes on and on, from brutal beatings to forms of enslavement and bonded labor. The spectrum basically is from on the one hand being more or less alienated when one is from a better kind of upper middle class and more affluent background. And then of course when once questions of caste and questions of poverty come in, religious identity to a certain extent then is often the last little marker that gives people, so to say, the allowance or the permission to use excessive forms of violence, right? So what I basically want to say with this, these kinds of religious forms of discrimination go through all Pakistani Hindus, so to say, but on the level of the more poorer community, you see excessive violence, which is often then also justified through religion, not only through their caste background, not only through their class background, so to say, right?
Justified through the religion, as in there's a religious justification to hurt them.
Right.
Like if they I guess the stereotype would be like they burnt the Quran or they insulted the Prophet.
Yes.
And then so they're very easy targets to mob violence, to any, if you do the wrong thing or you're at the wrong place at the wrong time,
Right.
you could be a target, a victim of violence, and there's nothing you can do about it.
So to give you an example of this, a video came out that I thought about quite extensively because it was fascinating. A video of a Muslim driver who drove through Sindh and then basically stops this Hindu boy and basically stops and films himself beating him up and say like, "Tum bolo ke dera pakwan PC hai," no? I'm not going to say the word, but so you say, basically, you curse your own God now, and he's filming himself. And this was a very interesting, and then he posted this video on social media, and then of course huge social media outcry, and then he also gets captured by the police. But for me, this video was such to put it a little succinctly, maybe in this regard, was such a good symptom for this kind of religious violence that we're speaking about. The being completely disinhibited, right? Being completely having the feeling you are absolutely allowed to deal with, these communities in the way that you want. And then there's these certain events where you see this. And this, I think, was one of those.
Wow. Another documentary you have on your website is really fascinating. You actually go to India and you interview and hang out with Pakistani Hindus who left Pakistan, who grew up in Pakistan, who left their home in Pakistan and moved to India and now live in this community of ex-Pakistani Hindus, ex-Pakistanis who are still Hindu, let me clarify, and they live there, and we get to see what their life is like now, and you kind of see, I guess, new levels of hardships. And I guess I'll let you answer this question or finish it, but what is the situation for Pakistanis who leave Pakistan and go to India and try for a better life there?
Right. So the film, when I made it, the situation was, I think the legal situation was different. It was in 2011, so it was 8 years before the 2019, Citizenship Amendment Act that basically opened Indian citizenship to religious minorities in the other states around South Asia, as long as they are not Muslim, right? So the situation, I think, has changed a lot.
Yeah.
Legal situation. What has not changed, and I think that this is kind of the main issue here as well, what has not changed is the idea of why people in Pakistan, mainly, like low caste communities, Choti communities, would leave for India. And it has to do with what we talked about in the beginning, about this, the ideological state apparatuses and the religious nationalism based on the Toqom-i Nazaria, on the two-nation theory, saying that Pakistan is basically a country for Muslims, while India is a country for Hindus, right? So this kind of repetition within the public sphere, but also within the sphere of education, very often then gives people the impression that once they're going to be in India, they're going to be treated as long-lost brothers and welcomed with open arms. Of course, these migration patterns are not that easy in that they're not like black and white. There are a lot of communities that leave because their keen people from their village have already left, and they also tell them. So it's not that people are completely like naively changing and crossing into the border, but it is certainly the case that people are very surprised. Pakistani Hindus are very surprised about the ways in which then they suddenly then are treated once they're in India, because they're not treated as I said, lost brothers, but they're rather treated as either Pakistani enemies or very often just as low caste migrants, right? And so this is unfortunately then a situation where a lot, at least when I made the film, were not able to work. We're not able to work in a métier that they studied for. I had this interview with this person who worked in a medical store, who was then collecting garbage in India, right? So that's kind of this cognitive dissonance that is I think the nationalism, if you want to call it ethno-nationalist discourses, maybe the religious discourses, maybe on both sides of the border, where people who then migrate are kind of caught in between, accepting that they are not a part of Pakistan as Hindus, hoping that they are going to be a part of India as Hindus, but then realizing that they're not a part of India because of their Pakistani heritage, passport, or their caste background.
Wow, it's very sad.
It is a very sad story.
Yeah. I don't want to just talk about this community as just on a lens of marginalization and oppression. I also want to talk about the beauty of the community and talk about its rich culture. So, what are some unique cultural practices and traditions of Pakistani Hindus?
Well, I mean, of course, I'm going to then bring this conversation and question towards the shrine of Hinglaj in Balochistan, which was how I started working on this community. Now, Hinglaj is a very interesting place of religious worship, simply because it is the westernmost, let's say, westernmost outpost of a sacred landscape of Hinduism, right? It is a part of the 52 or 51, or depending what kind of texts you ask, Shaktapitas, and very often in these old Sanskrit texts, considered to be the first of the Shaktapitas. Shaktapitas means the seats of power of the goddess, right? The goddess goes by many names, Shakti, Parvati, one of them being Hinglaj, and this is this place in Balochistan. Now, Hinglaj has a peculiar story simply because the place was almost impossible to find for many, many centuries. There were a lot of stories and myths around this place, but nobody really knew where it was exactly, because it's somehow located in the mountains of Balochistan in the middle of the desert, let's say 250 kilometers maybe away from the city of Karachi. Now, because it was so far, because it was so hard to go there, its spiritual value was considered to be extremely high, meaning once you managed to go through the blazing desert heat of Balochistan, you were considered to be completely burned out. Not burned out in this sense, but your sins have been completely burned out from the Balochistan sun. And so once you reached Hinglaj, after these 20 days or what it was of torture, you would be welcomed by the goddess herself, right? Yeah. So you were considered as a gift of the goddess then once you came back to your community. And this basic difficulty, this extreme difficulty of this pilgrimage had a variety of cultural, wonderful cultural let's say mechanisms, cultural narratives that came out of this, right? Be that in the Bengali tradition, be that in the Gujarati tradition, be that in a Hindi tradition, all over South Asia, so to say, right? Why is the pilgrimage important in this regard? It was hard to reach there. It was extremely difficult, and only a few could do it, right? So once you come back, of course, you were considered to be blessed. You were considered to be a present by the goddess. And so also your position within the society changed, right? So until today, you have, I don't know how long this word goes back. I've not found it in the texts, but until today, you're called a Hinglaji, right? Kind of like similar to being a Haji. Once you went on your Hajj, you're Hinglaji because you came back from your Hajj And look, and the people say until today, "Ke ye hamara Hajj hai, na?" So this is our Hajj. Wo Hajj ho ke wapas aaye hai, na?
Very cool.
So it's really so this movement was crucial, right? Being there, being one of the few people who comes back now. And this has been going on for many, many centuries. We really don't know how old the place is. People always want to know this, but in the Sanskrit texts, who are extremely difficult to locate, it's probably, you could say, the mention of Hinglaj is somewhere between the 10th and the 15th century, right? Relatively new, you could say. If you go with the oral traditions, right, you could say it's even earlier. It could be a part of even the 5th century. And then people, believers would say it's, hundreds of thousands of years old, right? But this old shrine in 2001 was suddenly connected to urban Pakistan, right? So what are you going to do with this shrine that has been completely distant from any kind of urban progress for hundreds and hundreds of years? And then in 2001, with the construction of the Makran Coastal Highway, suddenly can be reached by car within a few hours, right?
Right.
So these kinds of ritual dynamics were what I looked at in particular in the book, and how the different communities also claimed to be the original community, to be the first to have reached this place. What happened when all of these different traditions in Bengali, in Sindhi, in Marwari, in Gujarati, all of these different traditions suddenly clashed, because everybody was able to come at this place and talk about, well, what do you think? What does your tradition say about this, right?
Wow.
And the curious part was that when this happened, it was not like a deliberative, talk, rational talk about, oh, you see this like this, you see this like this. It was actually one particular community that took over the authority to completely interpret what is going on in Hinglaj. And it was a Lohana, so upper castes, a Sindhi community, a Lohana community, which basically made their own traditions because they have been living quite closely to the shrine, and because they have been going there for a long time, because they had the chance to rent cars, because they had the financial means, to once when the road was built, to bring people there, because they also had the know-how of the environment. Yeah. The last Lohana communities made their own particular understandings of what to do in Hinglaj, what to believe, what are the narratives, what are the myths, into the universal understanding of what real Hinduism is in Pakistan. And that was a very, very fascinating kind of development that I saw, because from a kinesthetic experience, where most of the most important part of the pilgrimage was that you walk, that you burn out your sins, that you think, that you meditate on this walk. So from a kinesthetic experience, with this road, it came to a specialization of very particular religious practices under the rule of this particular caste hegemony. And it was against upper caste, comparatively upper caste, which then defined and still defines what is the right way to worship in Hinglaj.
Wow. Do people of lower caste or other castes and different communities, do they still do what they want to do?
To a lesser extent, I need to say. I give you an example. So one thing I maybe need to add here. So 2001, the road is built, and I was there in Hinglaj, the first in 2009. So it was relatively not untouched, but the changes that were brought by the temple organization were relatively small in those days. Now, I was just there, I think 6 weeks ago. Now it has completely changed. There are no ponds. The ponds have changed. The ritual ponds. You needed to take a bath in this pond, then go to the next pond.
Ponds.
Bath. Yeah, the pond. Sorry, the little water pools, so to say.
Bodies of water.
Disappeared. There is a road that is built almost directly to the Sanctum Sanctorum. All of these things have completely changed. But in 2009, when I started going there, and then my research was from 2009 to 2015, in these 6 years, I basically saw in front of my eyes how this place developed, and how what used to be, how I imagine it, like a cloud of different practices, ideas, loosely connected, solidified, right, almost into a block
Mm-hmm.
of traditions, and every year of the festival, certain traditions that first were kind of contingent, that first were potentially, possibly right or not right, people considered them possibly right or not right, were repeatedly made into what people then started to consider the real thing. And this is why I called, at least in the US version of my book, I called the subtitle "Identity Change and Solidification," because the temple organization solidified their own particular understanding into the right understanding, and not in terms of, well, this is how we did it, this is how it must be right because we as a Lohana community have been here for such a long time, but under the idea of, enlightenment and education. Well, we do this because this is the right way to do. Well, we would never sacrifice animals in Hinglaj, even though people have been doing it for hundreds and hundreds of years, because that's the right way to do. Educated Hindus would not do sacrifices, simply because animal sacrifice is something that the Muslim majority does, right?
Right.
So I witnessed all of these little small decisions, which led to how Hinglaj is today. So a very old temple, a very old tradition, which might be, 1,500 even older, 1,500 years even older than that, solidified in front of my eyes into like a certain particular way of how to worship as a Hindu in Pakistan. And I think the most interesting part in this regard is the actual sanctum sanctorum, so the actual religious place, the axis mundi of this tradition, where you have the two faces of Hinglaj. And what needs to be mentioned here, Hinglaj used to be a shared shrine, right? So the Sigri community, a Muslim sect, one could say, which lives in this area, also worshipped and went, and still go to a certain extent, still goes to Hinglaj on ziyarat, on pilgrimage, right?
Right.
Aniki Hajj. So they say it's either, the grandmother of the prophet, right? Or it is, a female friend of the prophet, whatever the stories are. But they saw this as a Muslim saint and also used this pilgrimage in this kind of way to have a vrat, or a certain kind of wish that people would have, go to the saint and then hope that the wish is going to be fulfilled. Now, if you look at pictures in the 90s, you see very, very clearly that the Sanctum Sanctorum, the most central part of this religious tradition, looked like a Muslim grave. It's very obvious. It's like an oblong stone on top, right? It grew out of the actual mountain wall, it seems, right? It's hard to anticipate, but it's hard to see it retroactively. But at least what I've read in colonial texts and also before that, this part really grew out or came out of the wall, which is where the cave, the actual Hinglaj Murti, the actual face is in there. So it seems to be very, very old. But this impression of this being a Muslim grave with a few scattered stones on top has been completely changed by the Hinglaj Seva Mandali, by the actual temple organization, to make this more appealing to how the place is described in Sanskrit texts, right? I mean, for example, a text from the 18th century would describe this not as an actual, like as a place where the author has been, but would describe it, as having the face, the upper part of the head of the goddess Sati, which fell there after Shiva, did this horrible dance, the Tandava, and shook horribly, and then separated the limbs of the body, which were scattered all over South Asian continent. So you have these places, in places like Nepal, in places like Bangladesh, in places like India, and also one of them in Pakistan. And this story, which is in a text called the Pita Nirnayana from the 18th century, says it is the upper part of the head, the Brahmarandra, so the upper part that fell there. And so you see, according to the pictures and colonial sources, how the temple organization made the center of this tradition to appear more as it is in this text, even though it looked as if it would have been a grave before, right?
But isn't that really interesting? Because at the beginning we were saying how Pakistan has this narrative that it likes to propagate that it's a Muslim country, but the fact that there are non-Muslim communities in the country pierce through that narrative. And at the same time, there's this emerging Hindu community with this very important Hindu tradition, which is shared. They're trying to solidify this as a Hindu only narrative, but the history and the chapter of this shared Muslim community pierces through that narrative, and it's like a I don't know, Inception kind of thing.
Absolutely. It's to put it like this, Hinglaj is probably the only place in Pakistan where a shared tradition has been made into a Hindu tradition only, right?
Wow,
There's
wow.
still Tikri communities that go there, but if you go during the festival as a Muslim, you're not allowed to go in there into the place. It has been Hinduized. It's one of the few places that have been Hinduized in Pakistan, even though it had a Muslim history, right?
Right, and I'm assuming they don't want to talk about the Muslim history that much.
Not so much. No,
Okay.
you're so right.
One of the interesting things about this as a whole is that you had this pilgrimage, right? From my understanding, and I always imagine whenever someone says pilgrimage, I assume a very difficult journey. And now you have this pilgrimage to this location and it's very difficult, but suddenly they build a highway there and now it's a lot easier. Is a pilgrimage still a pilgrimage if it's not difficult? If it's very easy and accessible?
The harder it is, the more you're going to gain out of it.
Yeah,
But there is an interesting story between India and Pakistan, right? Because on the one hand, in Pakistan, the idea of the epitome of being a Hinglaji, of someone who is a gift of the goddess who came back, thus has an elevated position in society, has almost but ceased in Pakistan. You don't find this anymore. I would say it has disappeared.
this you mean this like this tradition of calling yourself a Hinlaji, like a Haji, where I guess since they live nearby, it's not really a big deal for them.
That is exactly the point. Because everybody can go. If you go, why should I
Yeah,
treat you differently, right?
right,
Now, interestingly, on the other side of the border, this tradition is very much alive. So it seems like that, the mythical kind of process, the mythical, selection process that the goddess would, have when she chooses who of the pilgrims is allowed to visit her, has now been taken over by the fierce border between India and Pakistan, because
right.
only a few can get the visa. Only a few could get there. And the research that I did in Rajasthan, around the area of Jaipur and in Jodhpur, particularly Jharan communities who have Hinglaj as their Kul Devi, so the Devi of the Jati of their community. They need to go to Hinglaj once in their lifetime, at least, according to the tradition. And for them, it is a very, very particular, very special thing if somebody is able to get the visa, go there, and come back, because as they say, Mata ne bulaya hai, the mother called you, so you're blessed by this. So.
Mhm.
So strangely, this tradition lives very much on the other side of the border, and the Rakshas are now, the people who sit in the offices of the visa offices, or in airlines, and not necessarily found in the desert nights, right?
Right. Um, is there no way we can help people like that mother in financially? You
You
know what I
mean to
mean?
get like a bunch of gangsters together
No,
and
no, 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 no.
able to,
To give her like a GoFundMe page or a kick
right?
something like that to give her to get people to donate money and maybe she can somehow get that money. Is there's no system in place.
Unfortunately not. But I tell you another thing. With the thing with giving money is that as I said, another like blatant self-advertising, but the project that I'm having right now looks at these humanitarian efforts in particularly in Pakistan, and how very often the attempt of giving money is well meant by people who just don't have the time to actually work and really go into issues very deep. But this money very often doesn't reach where it actually should. particularly money that is given for women with the intention for it to be for women. Money that I have given from my hand to another hand, to the person I wanted to support, is then taken by the family, right? Is then taken by the men in the family. So it's very, very hard to, which doesn't mean that one should not. I really want to emphasize this. There are a lot of ways to help, but large organizations usually cannot do much. The people who are really working on the ground want to stay under the radar because they do the best work by kind of, of doing work which cannot be scrutinized publicly, because they need to work in the gray areas of what is legally permissible in Pakistan, because this is the necessary kind of work that needs to be done with people who have been wronged to such an extent. So
I get it. Yeah. My last sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. I'm sorry that so much of what I'm telling seems to be so depressing.
I mean, no, yeah, which is why my last question is are you optimistic about the future of the outlook of the Pakistani Hindu community?
Yes, I am. And,
or maybe women in general, I guess, also.
Yes to both of these things, because even though I'm very critical about what technological developments did, and I'm very critical about what happens when our communication is monitorized, social media has brought a significant change to so many minorities in Pakistan. Social media has revitalized the Jewish community in Pakistan, Jewish communities that have almost but disappeared in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Social media has helped the connection to a more global Dalit schedule caste movement, right? Social media has brought so many things. So even though I'm very critical about it, I am optimistic because I have seen since, let's say, 2015, that's kind of the date I want to give more or less, when smartphone culture made it into the broader, the majority in Pakistan. Since 2015, in the last 10 years, let's say, how many things have changed to the worse, but so many also for the better.
Wow. Thank you so much. This is probably my longest episode I've ever done, but this is very, very insightful, so fascinating, I'm sure. And yeah, thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you again for taking the time, and also for particularly engaging in so much depth with my work.